Well, all right. Well, good afternoon to everyone joining us on the East Coast, and good morning to our friends and colleagues from Western time zones. My name is Chris Garland. I serve on NCST's community development team here with Raquel Reddy for today's session, and so glad you're able to join us. A couple of quick points. First, following today's presentation, we will have a Q&A portion, and we encourage attendees to submit those comments and questions through the Zoom Q&A feature. We'll also be recording today's session and be sharing today's slide presentation following today's call, which I'm sure will be of interest. Also be sharing a brief update from our policy team towards the end of our call, so please stick around for that. But we will definitely have plenty of time again for Q&A following today's featured presentation. Speaking of which, we are thrilled to have Jerusha Daniels and Colby Sledge on behalf of Grounded Solutions Network, which is a nonprofit, a national nonprofit organization working to support and expand homeownership models with lasting affordability, both joining us here today for today's community impact briefing. Jerusha Daniels is a affordable housing principal at Grounded Solution Network. She has more than 15 years of experience in affordable housing development, supporting local programs to build strategies to collaborate and innovate. Before joining GSN, Jerusha gained experience with low-income housing tax credits and HUD preservation projects, as well as managing CDBG rehabilitation programs and underwrote pre-development and construction loans for CDFIs. Also joining us is Colby Sledge, who's the local policy principal at Grounded Solutions Network. Prior to joining Grounded Solutions, Colby served 2 four-year terms as Metropolitan Nashville Davidson County Council member, where he focused on affordable housing, land use and zoning reform, and transit expansion. Colby currently serves as vice chair of the Metropolitan Development and Housing Agency in Nashville, Tennessee. On today's call, which we've titled Land and Supply, Building Land's Role in Developing Housing with Lasting Affordability, our presenters will be addressing the importance of the ongoing need to increase housing supply using impactful housing practices, which continues to be one of today's top priorities for those that support the production of more affordable housing stock. Jerusha and Colby will share their reflections regarding the role public land and public policy play in increasing the supply of homes with lasting affordability in the U.S. As we continue to seek innovative solutions to America's housing crisis, GSN and groups like it continue to provide key insights on strategy and practice to make homeownership accessible to more Americans. And so with that, let me welcome Jerusha Daniels and Colby Sledge to today's NCST Community Impact Briefing. Jerusha and Colby, I think you are set to share your screen, so I will go ahead and turn the controls over to you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Raquel, for inviting Colby and I and Grounded Solutions here today. So as Chris was saying, Grounded Solutions Network cultivates communities, equitable, inclusive, and rich in opportunity by advancing affordable housing solutions that last for generations. Today, we will be reflecting on 2 of Grounded Solutions initiatives that have focused on local solutions and efforts to make best use of publicly held land to increase production of homes with lasting affordable housing. Local solutions are ever more important in the current climate of continued interruptions on the federal level and an overall heightened environment of uncertainty and anxiety of federal funds and supports for affordable housing, not to mention market disruptions affecting housing production in general. So it's timely that we reflect on local solutions. Land and supply, reflections on the catalytic land cohort and for everyone home. We will discuss how local jurisdictions are increasingly recognizing that land within their control and ownership is an asset that can contribute great value and financial leverage to affordable housing developments. Streamlining disposition practices while prioritizing lasting affordable housing supports skilled development and ensures responsible public investment in perpetuity. Every local jurisdiction across the country acknowledges the need to increase the affordable housing supply. And more are recognizing that using public land plays an essential role. Looking to examples of this, localities are open to the conversation due to changing economics, growth patterns, and economic stagnation. Many are viewing these circumstances as directly related to their housing supply and affordability, and now are seeking new ways to increase their assets of housing and protect their investments for generations and be responsible public stewards. So backing up a moment, what does lasting affordability mean? Lasting affordable housing refers to homes that have some type of investment, public or philanthropic, to ensure affordability and resale restrictions that ensure future sales of that home are affordable in perpetuity. This can also apply to rental, which the restrictions that ensure that those rents are affordable in perpetuity. Shared equity housing is a common term and refers to a homeownership type in which an income qualified buyer agrees to future resale restrictions and essentially shares the home's equity when they sell it. So the next buyer receives a share of that home's equity, stays in that home to keep that home at an affordable price. So part of that share of the equity stays in the home, contributing to its affordability, and part of that share goes with the seller, along with their principal that they have paid, increasing their wealth. The application of lasting affordable mechanisms are not limited. There is room for creative applications that serve local needs, which is why we see such a diversity of program types and stewardship organizations. So community land trusts are maybe one of the most common shared equity organizations. They acquire, own, and steward land permanently for the common good. CLTs acquire land in a number of different ways. They can purchase land on the open market, they can receive land donations, or they can partner with city agencies, land banks, other entities to purchase land at a discounted rate. No matter what, however, once the land enters the CLT's portfolio, it remains in their portfolio in perpetuity and is never sold. As a CLT acquires land, it thinks about the end purpose of each parcel. The CLT can put land to any number of uses, but they are most known for providing affordable homeownership opportunities to households that are excluded from the traditional market. We often ask, what is the highest and best use of that property? And we answer that question by considering how much money the property could make. CLTs, on the other hand, ask, what is our community's greatest need? And they pursue those opportunities within reason. In addition to providing affordable home ownership opportunities, CLTs have used their land to provide affordable single and multifamily rental opportunities, mixed income and mixed use developments, community-oriented commercial spaces, community gardens, and much more. So now let's go back a little bit more. And so here I'm getting to do this story not justice because it's a too short history of the birth and growth of community land trusts in the United States, which is rooted in the civil rights movement and in a necessary outgrowth for economic justice. Several key players in the civil rights movement, as you can see here on this slide, recognize the need for Black economic justice and its necessary means for land ownership and control. They sparked ideas for a new model of land tenure, what today we call a community land trust. So a short timeline. 1961, a very real consequence of successful voter registration is the displacement of Black families from their homes and sources of economics. They're forced from sharecropping farms and plantations on which they worked and lived. By June of 1965, Charles Sherrod, who is active through the Southwest Georgia Project, is beginning to focus on economic justice, recognizing the need to own land and that land is the ultimate power. In 1968, Charles Sherrod, Slater King, and 6 others traveled to Israel to learn about the Moshav model for housing and cooperative development on community-owned land. They brought back legal documents and mechanisms to adapt to U.S. real estate law, building the ground lease from existing U.S. commercial leases. In 1969, Charles and Shirley Sherrod established New Communities, Inc., the first community land trust in the United States. It was 6,000 acres of land, representing a shift from civil rights to economic justice. It's the largest contiguous tract with Black ownership in the country. It was collectively owned as a beloved community to be farmed and a place to build homes. In all ways, it was cooperative living. Through time, the land was farmed, yet racist policies and lacking access to credit, all housing development was blocked. After years of drought and no access to credit, the land was foreclosed on in 1985. In 1997, New Communities, Inc. and African American farmers filed a class action lawsuit against the Farmers Home Administration. On July 8, 2009, they won the case and $12 million in damages, in which Cypress Pond Plantation was purchased, an antebellum home and 1,600-acre plantation that was once owned by Georgia's largest slave owner. Today, it is New Resora, Inc., and a cooperatively farm that farms 80 acres of pecans and has a retreat center. So that is the story and history of the first community land trust. Meanwhile, throughout the 70s, in urban areas, the growing grassroots community development movement is organizing tenants and residents for improved and affordable housing conditions. The new CLT model was adapted to meet these urban needs, applying CLT mechanisms to own, control, and redevelop scattered sites, not just contiguous land like new communities. By the 1980s, the first municipally supported CLT emerged in response to retreating federal government financial supports. The feds declared housing is a local problem. Cities were looking to preserve their investments and retain affordable homes for their communities. One early city-supported CLT was Dudley Neighbors, Inc. The city of Boston provided this organization the power of eminent domain to acquire abandoned and blighted properties in their neighborhood. They also supported redevelopment and the actual construction of homes with public funds. In Albuquerque, New Mexico, the city transferred a 26-acre parcel, a former brownfield, to the Sawmill Community Land Trust to develop lasting, affordable homes. Today, there are more than 300 community land trusts across the United States and many more across the world. One of the ways Grounded Solutions has been supporting the growth and expansion of this field is through peer learning exchanges designed to provoke and support local collaborations and create actionable solutions that address local housing needs. In 2019, we launched the Catalytic Land Cohort Initiative with support from Wells Fargo and in partnership with the Center of Community Progress. The cohort across the nation was Portland, Oregon, Atlanta, Georgia, and Houston, Texas. The main objective was to convey public properties into assets for lasting affordable housing production, to increase ownership by Black households and communities of color. For 3 years, the cohort received technical assistance, strategic planning, and facilitated peer learning. In order to achieve the goals of this initiative and increase their market competitiveness, the cohort identified 6 impact statements that really guided this body of work to build community-wide strategies and increase the CLT's needs to produce homes with lasting affordability. Every local team leaned into the collaborative stakeholder engagement and co-creation aspects. Just like the actions varied across localities. So first, in Atlanta, the local players, being Atlanta Land Trust and Metro Atlanta Land Bank, um, them and the ecosystem and stakeholders, the main focus was finding and launching collaborative solutions. And so through a strong and intentional partnership, the Metro Atlanta Land Bank and Atlanta Land Trust created a prioritization policy that fast-tracked approval of MALB's public land transfers to Atlanta Land Trust to develop homes with lasting affordability. This policy included a transparent pricing methodology and outlined affordability restrictions, both of which deferred to Atlanta Land Trust ground lease as the durable restriction required for land discounts and ease of monitoring over time. This relationship became a model for additional Atlanta jurisdictions to use as the city completes a comprehensive public land analysis and disposition strategy. This past year, Metro Atlanta Land Bank updated and expanded the policy to any organization utilizing a long-term affordability restriction of at least 60 years to align with funding sources and city policies that support lasting affordable housing. Ensuring Metro Atlanta Land Bank's inventory of homes is available to the growing field of shared equity housing providers in the Atlanta region. This emerging best practice prompted Grounded Solutions, close partnership with Center for Community Progress, to create a sample land bank long-term housing affordability disposition policy. The main goal of this document, which I will share the link, it's publicly available, I'll share the link later. The main goal of the document is to guide land banks to consider aspects of lasting affordability and partner organizations such as community land trusts. The sample policy contains annotations and provides additional context and questions for entities to consider when crafting their own local policy. In Houston, the Houston Community Land Trust had just launched in 2018, 2019, and was initially focused solely on a land bank CLT partnership for homes. It was its initial inception. Many factors, including the COVID-19 pandemic, led Houston Community Land Trust to create a new program, a home buyer initiated program, which allowed buyers to identify homes off the open market, saving time and costing developing homes at this crucial point in history. However, through the testing and learning of that initial phase of partnership with the land bank, the production didn't work out, but a strong relationship and deep understanding of each other's organizational mission and goals fostered their ability to create innovative programming, solving issues on both sides of the coin. Houston Community Land Trust had a need for smaller, very low-cost homes, while Houston Land Bank had a surplus of odd-shaped and small-sized lots. Together, they engaged local universities to design replicable small single-family home designs that would appropriately fill the surplus lots and match existing neighborhood characters. The ability to replicate building of the same design and a plethora of available lots streamlines production and should add ease to scaling this type of infill in Houston. In Portland, Oregon, the cohort participation was unique in that there was not one, or rather a main public landholding entity identified to participate. Throughout the time of the initiative, the great value of public land and the role it plays in housing production rippled through the city, county, and metro. The CLC sparked and supported stakeholder conversations and advocacy, also the creation of effective tools and solutions for more efficient land analysis and acquisition processes. These broad conversations amongst public landholding jurisdictions inspired creative thinking and means to assess and transfer public land for affordable housing development. This prompted Habitat for Humanity, Portland region, to create a custom land assessment model in their current proprietary development and asset management software. This allows them to share the burden of analyzing transferred public lands for housing development in a more efficient way. Habitat Portland region is a Proud Ground Community Land Trust's sole development partner. So there's a direct relation to lasting affordable housing in every home that Habitat Portland develops and sells. So the fact that Habitat was able to share this burden with public jurisdictions allowed shortened decision-making time and was able to more quickly identify appropriate parcels for development that meets updated zoning and density allowances. So public land can be a significant source to increase affordable housing production, can also be burdensome for mission-driven and usually nonprofit organizations to assess and analyze land for appropriate use, accounting for zoning, density, brownfield, environmental issues, etc. It is vital that public jurisdictions find means to share this burden and create every possible efficiency throughout the disposition process. Strong partnerships and collaboration lead to innovations and creative uses. Finding intersecting solutions often solves multiple problems. This co-creation and collaborative partnership approach is working its way into a more diverse range of localities than we have recently seen. Here's my colleague, Colby, to speak more on this and this partnership approach to increasing housing supply. Here is Colby Sledge once we
Thank you, Jerusha.
transfer. There you go. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you for walking us through. So yeah, as Jerusha mentioned, this growing interest, frankly, in how to keep our localities affordable for a wide variety and range of residents has opened up new localities in the work that we've been doing, and places that I think maybe we wouldn't have initially considered within the work that we do, and perhaps in the work that you do as well. So we're going to talk through a little bit about the lessons that we've learned from multi-locality land use cohort that we call For Everyone Home. For Everyone Home, for those who may not be familiar, this is a technical assistance cohort that we created in partnership with Melville Charitable Trust, with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and with our operational partners Up for Growth, who are also a housing supply national nonprofit advocacy organization. We worked for 18 months with our selected cohort members on helping chart a path on housing production. Housing supply increase was a main goal of this cohort, but also preservation of that housing through lasting affordability. This was the second cohort that we conducted. The first one consisted of Indianapolis, San Antonio, and Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And that cohort, it launched, frankly, about 2 months before everything shut down in 2020. So the shift of that cohort, the focus shifted into a lot of anti-displacement work. But one of the things that came out of that was the formation of a housing trust fund within Indianapolis, set forth actually by ARPA dollars. So as we worked toward this cohort, we wanted to kind of elevate the level of government that we were working with from the municipality level to the county level. And we'll talk about kind of why that emerged. But in our county cohort, we selected 2 counties. We worked with Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, which many will know is the county where Charlotte is the county seat. And then we worked with DuPage County, Illinois, which is the largest county outside of Cook County in Illinois, and forms one of the main counties within the Chicagoland area. Both of these counties were selected through an interview process that we conducted, and also through expressing self-interest. And we were able to partner with them over the course of late 2023 and then through all of 2024. To give a little bit of background on those 2 counties to see their similarities and differences. As you can see, Mecklenburg County is one of the fastest growing counties in the country. They are, just over 1 million now. DuPage County, their growth has been pretty stagnant over the last decade. mainly because there hasn't been a lot of housing growth. There has been some departure, but there's also been international immigration, which has kept their population steady. Without it, they would have seen a greater decline. Demographics, you can see there, Mecklenburg County is not a majority white county anymore. It used to be, and it has diversified over the last decade plus. Whereas DuPage County fits kind of what you might think of as a standard suburban mold, especially in suburban Chicago. But both counties have been seeing more racial and ethnic diversity within their residents over the past decade. Median household income there, you can see, has stayed somewhat steady. Both have increased over the last decade, but DuPage has been traditionally a wealthier county, and definitely above the median within the state. But however, you can see their home values are very similar, their rents are very similar, and so when we talked through as we started this cohort work, there were similar challenges when it came to affordability versus income level, and also when it came to affordability versus the supply available. So just to walk you very quickly, we worked with our cohort members and Up for Growth to create a housing under production report, in which we showed the main issue that came out of both counties was a housing supply mismatch, meaning that there were a lot of folks who were heavily cost burdened, paying more than 30 and sometimes more than 50% of their household income on housing costs or housing plus transportation costs. And then there were folks on the other end of that barbell where they were paying decidedly less than 30%. And so there were folks who had been doing very well from an affordability standpoint, but that typically correlated with income, not so much with affordable housing costs. And so many times what we had to talk through counties with was that you may think, it's never going to be one house equals one resident. You were always going to have some sort of vacancy rate. Within the formula we used, it was 5%. And you are always going to have a diversification of supply in order to meet the growing and changing needs of your populations. Within that, we did stakeholder interviews and community engagement sessions as well. We were very intentional on working with our on-the-ground community partners. That is something that we learned from the first cohort, is that we really needed to partner with organizations who had not necessarily housing expertise, but expertise in the sort of services needed when folks were seeking housing, when folks were facing some sort of economic instability that was almost, if not always, tied to housing. And so we partnered with the United Way of Greater Charlotte and Mecklenburg County, who had been tasked by the county with creating their overall housing strategy. It was primarily focused on kind of a housing first model, a prevention of homelessness, but the county also acknowledged that there were greater housing needs that were extending well beyond just that very immediate need. And then in DuPage County, we've worked with the DuPage Federation on Human Services Reform, which again had worked very closely with the growing and changing population within DuPage County and the services needed and sometimes needed to expand within that county. And those are some examples there. We did conduct community engagement sessions in Spanish. We conducted sessions with residents who were facing housing insecurity or who were some of those cost-burdened households like we talked about. And our community partners were fantastic in helping identify and facilitate those conversations, which was a key part of the findings that we came to. So as we conducted our site visits, we visited both Mecklenburg County and DuPage County to present our housing under production reports. And then I'm based in Nashville, which has similarities to both of these counties. So we brought folks to Nashville for a couple of days to talk through and see different examples of the housing solutions we were proposing or saying might be a good fit for those counties. That photo in the bottom right is actually our group that was outside a shared equity townhome project that was in Nashville, where one of our Metropolitan Planning Commission members actually bought and has lived there for several years now. To give a sense of the localities that we involved, in previous iterations of this cohort, we worked just with municipalities, right? fairly large municipalities, but we had one entity we were dealing with. When we worked with our counties, we wanted to ensure that municipalities were involved to whatever extent they wanted to be. As you can see, there's quite a difference in the number of municipalities between these two counties, but we did have great participation among both. Those stars indicate whether we had conversations or meetings or participants who represented each of those municipalities, where we went on site visits, where we talked with elected officials who gave us a greater sense of what their particular communities were facing when it came to housing needs. So by doing so, we were able to foster a more participatory and kind of back and forth amongst these localities that they experience on some level day to day, but not to the extent of when we were coming with a particular subject matter like this. Our main deliverable for these counties was that our housing action plans. We wanted to ensure that both of these counties were moving toward a policy piece by the end of our time in 2024 together as a cohort. So from the work that we did, we kind of funneled down to say, look, if you are serious about increasing supply, you need to look at the assets that you already have, and you need to find out how to turn liabilities into assets within your counties. To no surprise, I think the similarities there, we talked about inclusionary housing policies. I know sometimes that's a bit of a complicated or sensitive subject about including a percentage or requiring a percentage of affordability within new construction and the very many different varieties of those policies that take place. For our purposes, we talked about kind of the high level of what that would entail. Where we focused was land inventory and acquisition, which we'll get to on the next slide. And then we also found that both counties had major obstacles to renting. Some of that was due to supply. Some of that was due to a lack of regulation within rental properties about what prospective and current renters could expect as far as costs and expenses. So we found that as a commonality between these counties and some that I think would not be a surprise. Where we found differences, however, were in kind of where people were along the timeline. Mecklenburg County has worked on its housing plans for some time now. They are working on diversification of housing supply. They have not, the city of Charlotte does have a housing trust fund, but on the county level, they have not pursued a larger fund structure for preservation of affordable housing. Whereas DuPage, they were kind of at the beginning. They were at the starting line of identifying the issue and then trying to find the potential solution. So that did include typology, specifically for multifamily, but where we focused was in creating that fund infrastructure. They had not created any type of housing trust fund or dedicated funding, I would say, expenditure model. They had, in fact, allocated housing funding for the first time with a turnover of their electeds and made that a priority, but did not have the ability to expend it. So what we did then is we selected for Mecklenburg County to develop a strike fund for naturally occurring affordable housing, which is something that had been actually recommended for them in a previous study, but they had not been able to follow through to that point. In DuPage, like I said, we were at the starting line on a couple of these structures. So we talked about the creation of a housing trust fund and about the fact that there needed to be some participation in land banking. Other Chicagoland counties do participate in land banking, but DuPage had not. We will talk a little bit about why that is. But they were at that point convinced that there needed to be that level of formality when it came to their public land holdings. So where we are in Mecklenburg County now our cohort work has ended, but obviously we still keep in touch with our county members. Mecklenburg County, we helped write and issue the RFP for the naturally occurring affordable housing strike fund, and that fund design consultant was selected at the start of this year, and that work is ongoing. We also had talked about transit-oriented development land acquisition with the Board of Commissioners in Mecklenburg County. As some of you may know, if you're familiar with what's going on in North Carolina, there's an ongoing conversation in the state legislature about how Charlotte and its Mecklenburg County municipalities can participate in transit expansion. The funding referendum legislation for that was filed just last week. All 5 of the 6 municipalities and the Mecklenburg County manager are in favor of this legislation, and now they are working on its passage in order to be able to put it on the ballot later this year. Within that conversation has been, how do we acquire land to hold for lasting affordability for home ownership in particular? Charlotte has done a fairly good job, and Mecklenburg County has as well, in partnering together to provide tax abatements to preserve multifamily affordable housing. It has been done on a case-by-case basis, and the developer, and there's one fund in particular that many of you may be familiar with, will get an MOU or get something under contract and then come to the city and county simultaneously for those abatements. This strike fund was designed to both expand that work and also formalize it in a way that the county would be able to act more quickly. And you'll see what we anticipate is the result of that from a unit preservation standpoint. In DuPage, some really interesting things are happening right now. There is a state enabling legislation. There's state enabling legislation needed because the only county that has home rule in Illinois is Cook County, where Chicago is. And so in order to obtain some of these affordable housing measures, the county has to go to the state and ask for those powers to be expanded. Those powers including the creation of an affordable housing trust fund. Municipalities are able to do that, but not counties. The legislation that's put forth that we've advised on expands that power to Chicagoland County based on population. So we see that there's the opportunity now for multiple counties to potentially allocate and expend dollars specifically toward affordable housing. Creating land bank partnerships and creating I will say countywide, locality-based land banks, giving counties the opportunity to do that and expand the percentage of AMI for which they can work. Oftentimes in lasting affordability work and homeownership work, many of participants reach that 80 to 100% AMI level, which some jurisdictions don't really account for. They account for 60% or 80% and below. So we're working on a little bit of that expansion, and also for counties to be able to fund infrastructure in exchange for affordability agreements, right, or for deed restrictions based on affordability levels. I mean, as you can see there, we have a menu of advocacy partners who we've put together. So as that legislation makes its way into the currently convened state legislature in Illinois, we're optimistic that the county will soon have these powers. Supply projections for both of these. In Mecklenburg County, we anticipated both an allocation from the county and a leverage point to reach a strike fund of about $100 million. The county is aiming to do a couple of deals a year on multifamily units that should range in the 500 to 600 unit annual preservation. That would then, of course, over a 5-year period, which is what our cohorts were working on, would create a total of 2,500 to 3,000 units that are permanently preserved for affordable housing. In DuPage, we anticipate a fully funded affordable housing trust fund, and the permissions we just discussed could yield 400 to 500 units per year once it's up and running, which we believe would yield somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 units. And then if you take those efforts combined with our first cohort, which I mentioned at the start of this presentation, that cohort estimated creating about, or preserving or creating about 4,600 units of lasting affordability. So our goal is to get somewhere between the 9,000 to 10,000 unit range of both preserved and created housing with lasting affordability, combination of rental and home ownership, but we do see our localities stressing home ownership. Why does that matter? So in Mecklenburg County, a place, a southern county that's got a lot of growth as we're seeing throughout the Sun Belt. Housing is becoming an unavoidable topic, but also one that's gaining a lot of, I will say, whatever you want to say, apartisan, bipartisan, nonpartisan support, just an acknowledgement that things can't keep going the same rate they are, or that folks are going to be pushed out. And frankly, there's going to be a multi-generational ripple effect in which that growth will peak and then will start to decline. In DuPage County, we found that there's new momentum in suburban markets like this one because there's already sort of a default, I guess I would say, to home ownership, right? And I think we all know sort of the historical ramifications and implications of that, but it creates a new environment in which there's a thought that, yes, we want to aim toward home ownership because that's the expectation. And so creating home ownership with lasting affordability is actually less of a leap in that conversation. It's just a question of how you do it. And that's the clip that's on the right there is one of several that we had over the last few weeks where the county has seen, hey, there is momentum for this. So the key takeaways that I want to stress to folks on the call is that we are seeing across the country and in markets that typically wouldn't have considered this previously, increased interest in creating or partnering with land banks. They all have public land, and that's why we're here. They all have parcels that are developable. There is a range of readiness when it comes to whether those municipalities or localities know which ones are developable. They know if their titles are cleaned or not, if they have other issues or liens on them. But we do see that overall, land banking is becoming a strategy toward, at a time where federal funding is just unreliable, to say the least, to look inward and to look at what localities already have and what they already control, to be able to put those to work. And remember that many a times this public land that's on these localities books is a liability, right? It has there may be some safety issues with them. There are definitely maintenance issues that most of them deal with. There's just a depreciation that the counties would be better served both for their residents and for their own books to turn into assets. What we've also found in these conversations is there's a lot of education that's needed on just what it means to pursue lasting affordability. To say a community land trust doesn't necessarily, it's something that people are interested in, but then there's a lot of explanation and definition that's needed. The good thing is that the will is there among localities, but we do find that there's an education gap that we obviously at Grounded Solutions are working to bridge. And then the thing I hope that most folks get out of this is that there are new and growing markets for public land use. We obviously know there's a huge conversation happening on the federal level, but that conversation is happening in a lot of states and localities across the country. And when I say that there are economic and political shifts, economic shifts obviously due to some economic uncertainty, political shifts because there has been lots of turnover on state and local levels in which folks may be coming in, and this is again kind of regardless a lot of times of political affiliation, but folks who may have been involved in their communities or may have been involved in some kind on the housing field or industry who are taking elected office and making this a priority. And so finding those and working with those localities has been a priority for us. So I would be remiss without saying we're going to be talking a lot more about this next month at our annual conference for Grounded Solutions. So if you're interested, you can obviously check out our website at groundedsolutions.org. But I really want to thank everybody for the opportunity to present, especially to Chris and Raquel, and our email addresses there below. And I think we're going to have time for some questions.
Yes, that's exactly right. And Colby, Jerusha, thank you so much. This was really fantastic. So appreciated you joining us, sharing your insights, and it's also it's really timely, right? It's great to know that your annual conference is right around the corner for those who want to learn more. And yes, as you mentioned, as we do most months, let's Raquel, let's take some time for some Q&A.
Yeah. So now's a great time to put any questions that you may have in the Q&A. We do have one that's already there, so I'll tee that up for both Jerusha and Colby. And that question is, it appears that the process, concept to building completions will take 5 to 10 years. How can we accelerate this process?
Money.
Either one.
I think it's the first. One, I'll speak from the locality perspective. One is ensuring that localities are already working to make sure that public land that it's clean title, that it's developable, that they have done the work internally. Sometimes they contract that out to organizations as well. I served on the Housing Trust Fund here in Nashville, and one of the biggest things we found that was creating literally year-long delays were unclear titles for properties. And so getting that prioritized makes a big difference. And then just an acknowledgement that the subsidy gap grows every year. And so if there's a thought that, oh, let's wait and get all our ducks in a row, there just needs to be acknowledged that there's an expense on the other side of that. And so working with folks who have the capacity to move quickly will help shorten that timeline. But yeah, there is a lot of work to do on the locality side to ensure that once it is either partnered with or turned over, dispossessed, whatever it might be, that folks are able to hit the ground running. Jerusha, what'd you think?
I agree with all of that. And then also just on the approvals and permitting side, regulations are important and also can create barriers. One example, in the city of Atlanta, they actually came together and formed the mayor's strike force with affordable housing partners and affordable housing, or just development adjacent departments within the city, to meet weekly on what was holding up the processes and or approvals that week. Well, nobody wants to meet every week. And so you really start to figure some stuff out more quickly, and have all brains and hands in on reinventing that process, and prioritizing those approvals and permitting for affordable housing is one aspect that they were able to speed up production.
Well, thank you both for contributing to that answer. We have a question that's come into the chat. So let me go to that one next, and then we have a few more in the Q&A. This comes from Christy. How do you talk to jurisdictions about the value of lasting affordability? We see pressure to transfer land for the development of housing, adding supply, but not the desire to create initial or lasting affordability. So from a best practices standpoint, how do you think you could answer that?
I say a lot of times I talk about stewardship of public dollars. So for instance, when a lot of these programs are started out, they may look at purely, they may loan money, right? They may bond out money, or they may do grants, right, for trust funds. When that money, obviously there's a repayment on the loan schedule, but they tend to be fairly lengthy. And then also if there's a grant, you're granting over this land, and then it's out of your control. And that's not necessarily, it depends on the situation, right? It's not necessarily a bad thing to do in certain cases. What I found was a powerful argument, no matter kind of who I was talking to, was to say, wouldn't you prefer that we not just hand over an asset and never have it again to a public entity, right? If you're able to create those structures where you're doing a long-term land lease, where you've got those affordability measures intact, those lasting affordability measures, then the locality is able to still realize the value of its land. And because it happens, right? If something goes south, they haven't lost that land forever, right? They have the ability to call that back. They have the title still, and the ownership. And so I say it's a way to ensure, again, that a liability is turned into an asset for the taxpayers. And if you're doing it with lasting affordability, a lot of times that's a one-time subsidy, as Jerusha described, that recycles with its equity, right? With the shared equity model. So again, a better bang for your buck on the investment piece, and that's super critical when it comes to public dollars.
Great, thank you. A couple more questions in the Q&A. Let's get to some of those. This comes from Miriam Hicks. Smaller CLTs have struggled to retain development experience and sufficient cash flow to continue development capability. Some have been taken advantage of by being given 10% of development fees rather than a share that allows ongoing operations. What structure or structural changes are you seeing to make these organizations function long-term in this housing shortage?
Bruce, you may be more familiar with the.
Jerusha, you want to try?
That's a very common question, and a common, I think it's many organizations, many jurisdictions, many philanthropic funders continue to work this problem. I think it's that tried and true, it's the equation we're all trying to solve, is economies of scale. And what is scale, and how do we take what capacity we have currently and meet the need that far outpaces our capacity? And I think a lot of times when there is a creative solution like shared equity housing or a community land trust, that a lot of the burden gets put on them in order to succeed and continue to scale. And going back to my earlier argument of like, this is a shared problem. There need to be co-created solutions and collaborations, and to share the burden, and also build faster, build more. Colby?
No, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add on. yeah, I totally agree.
All right, let's ask another question here from J.R. Fleming. Hi, J.R. Is there a way for NCST to encourage Freddie Mac? Well, this is a question for us, I guess. Is there a way for NCST to encourage Freddie Mac and its partners who they receive properties from to give donated properties deeper discounts to NSI buyers who have CLTs and are partnering with CLTs? And are partnering with CLTs also, can they encourage more community buyers like land banks and CDFIs who are community buyers as well to other CLT discounts? So I think at the basis of that question is just a deeper discount on properties that would be more, intentionally provided to a more of a CLT partnership. Obviously, that's a question that we can go back and have that conversation with. Many times it's just finding the opportunities, right? Maybe it's not every single property, maybe it's certain areas. One of my questions is kind of, where's the next list of metros, right? Maybe tying it to some of that. So JR, no, I'm not answering that question specifically, but it gives us some ability to go back and have those conversations. So thanks for putting it out there for us. Anonymous question, or anonymous attendee, let's see. If a city already has hundreds of undeveloped, developable urban renewal lots, should it still pursue a CLT or a land bank? So Colby or Jerusha?
Yes.
Well,
Jerusha, what would you say?
I was going to say CLTs and land banks are not synonymous. They are
Right.
supportive. And I'm not saying that you're saying they are one and the same. I'm just stating that is a common misnomer, that they have the same functionalities, when in reality they have very different functionalities and are extremely efficient partners, or can be. The opposite can also be true. But yes, I would say absolutely, both depending on what the needs are and what those landholding portfolios look like and how many jurisdictions there are that are controlling those lots. A land bank could possibly be a very good pursuit, sort of acting as that repository or that collective. And they typically have powers that jurisdictions do not. And like Colby was talking about, clearing title and untangling title. And then I will always advocate that publicly owned parcels or open parcels or infill development should prioritize lasting affordable housing. We've just always seen an erosion of affordability over time, especially even in cities that thought we're always going to be affordable, and they've seen that quickly disappear. And so the more we can preserve in perpetuity, the better for the future of affordability.
Yeah, absolutely. And real quick, I know we're up against time. What I encounter a lot is sort of that education piece I mentioned on the lasting affordability. Is municipalities or localities can do pretty well in either partnering or setting up a land bank if they're really dedicated to doing it. But then they say, okay, great, now let's do a community land trust. And that's where you say that may not fully depend on you, right? That there has to be a capacity built. And what municipalities and localities can do is help with the capacity building for community organizations who are rooted within their communities towards this lasting affordability approach. But that work almost has to be done simultaneously, the setting up of a land bank while helping build the capacity to ensure that when that land bank is up and running and ready to potentially provide parcels to that land trust, that land trust is ready organizationally to receive it.
And I would be amiss to say that shared equity housing and lasting affordability can be accomplished in many different ways, even through municipal affordable housing programs. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have this organization in order for your locality to produce lasting affordable units.
Great. Well, thank you, both of you, Jerusha and Colby, for answering those questions. I feel that we have gotten to all of them right now. And with a minute or so left, I'm going to bring back Chris Garland to just do a quick update on our policy front. But thank you both.
Yes, thank you both. Absolutely. And thank you, Raquel. Yeah, as I had mentioned at the start of the call, we don't have a policy team member here, but happy to share some significant news regarding the neighborhood homes, which I know many of you have been tracking right along with us, right? Our policy team here at NCST and the Neighborhood Homes Coalition are pleased to announce the reintroduction of the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act to the 119th Congress, which was just this past Thursday, April the 10th, by Representative Mike Kelly and Representative John Larson. For some background, the legislation establishes a new federal tax credit to incentivize the rehabilitation of deteriorated homes in distressed neighborhoods. States would receive neighborhood home tax credit authority to administer and allocate credits on a competitive basis. NCSC co-manages the Neighborhood Homes Coalition and has been at the forefront of advocacy for neighborhood homes alongside LISC and the National Association of Affordable Housing Lenders. So moving forward, we are still awaiting introduction of neighborhood homes in the Senate, but we're expecting that to happen after the Senate returns from their Easter recess sometime in the spring. We want to stress how important it is to engage with members of the House and what this credit could mean for home ownership and overall economic impact that additional support in home ownership has in job creation, in placement, and supporting our nation's families. So we urge you to reach out to your representatives to get on board with the legislation, encourage others to support neighborhood homes, and or thank those members who've already demonstrated their support for the bipartisan legislation. If you're looking for ways to engage and would like more information on the bill, please check out the Neighborhood Homes Coalition website, which Raquel has just dropped in the chat feature. And again, with that, thanks so much to today's presenters from Grounded Solutions, Jerusha Daniels and Colby Sledge. And of course, thank you to our attendees. Next month's call is set for May the 21st, the third Wednesday of the month. We look forward to seeing you then. And with that, on behalf of NCST, have a great rest of your week. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.